What's up, guys? I'm Lucas and welcome to Terracotta Aquarium. Today I'm going to share with you guys 5 things that I do every week to maintain my tanks. The first thing I'm going to do is some water testing. So I've got my API freshwater master test kit, and then I've got some more just generic test strips. I like to use the test strips for my more well-established tanks. It can give me more of an overview of what's going on in a shorter amount of time. And if I see anything crazy on here, then I bust out the master test kit. And for more newer tanks that aren't as established, I'll just go straight to the master test kit. What I'm going to be looking for with these water tests is any sign of ammonia, nitrite, or nitrate. If I see any higher level in any of those, then I'm going to do a water change. I don't expect to really need to do a water change on my well-established tanks, but there's a high possibility that I'll be doing one for the bonsai pond. This first step in water testing for maintenance kind of informs what the next steps of the maintenance are going to be. So this is the test strip for Quarry Mountain here. And you can see mostly what we're looking at is the nitrate, the nitrites, and the ammonia. And you can kind of get a scale on these tubes. The lighting is not perfect here for this. Come over here. But yeah, we're looking at those values and we want them to basically be 0 for all of them. That'll let you know that you don't need a water change. If you see any excess in any of those, then you should proceed with a water change. So we're good on Quarry Mountain. One thing that's really interesting with this tank though is that if you look at this total alkalinity and the hardness and also the pH, this tank is really high on all of these. But the fish are fine. The alkalinity, I've learned recently, is actually very, very good for our dwarf sage here and also for the Vallisneria spiralis in the back. So a high pH like this doesn't necessarily mean that anything is wrong with your tank, especially if you don't see any problems with the fish or the plants or anything like that. You just need to choose the correct species of fish and the correct plants to live in a space like this. And yeah, very hard water, high alkalinity, and very high pH. But that's okay. It's working. So for a little bit of comparison, we can look at the readings here for the Blackwater riverbed. And if you take a look, first thing we look at is, of course, nitrate, nitrite, and ammonia. And it appears that we are totally fine on all of those. You might not be able to tell the color, but it looks like they are totally fine. And again, if I was concerned that these were maybe a little bit too different from the white value we're looking for, then I could take out the master test kit. But it is really interesting to look at these readings because as you can see, the alkalinity, the pH, and the hardness are all totally different than Quarry Mountain. So you can get a lot of insight into your tanks by reading for pH, alkalinity, and hardness. The reason why the alkalinity is so high in Quarry Mountain here is because of the substrate. And I've touched on this in previous videos, but there is quite a bit of crushed coral in the bottom of this tank. I accidentally added way more than I should have. And so that is increasing the alkalinity, increasing the hardness, and overall just buffering the pH up and up and up. But I've come to the conclusion that this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's making all of my plants, at least the ones that can uptake bicarbonates, like the dwarf sage, the Vallisneria spiralis back here, it's making all of them grow super well. And I don't see an adverse effect on the fish at all. So I think it's gonna be fine, honestly. I've been a little bit concerned about it in the past, but I've been doing some reading, that sort of thing. And yeah, I've come to the conclusion that we're gonna be okay. So to test the water in the bonsai ponds, I've taken these 3 water samples, and in the freshwater master test kit, you've got little bottles that will test for ammonia, your nitrites, and your nitrate. So they've also got this handy key that you can use to tell what the levels are in the aquarium. So one important thing is to make sure you shake all of these up before using them. And on each bottle, it says the amount of drops that you need to add for each chemical, and you want to wait about 5-10 minutes to get a good reading. So for example, for the ammonia, for each of these bottles, I add 8 drops. So bottle number 1, 8 drops, and then bottle number 2, 8 drops. So as you can see, water test completes, and we certainly have some results. So the way you can read this is just take your little vial here and just put it next to the readings. So for ammonia, you can see we've got a little bit of a green tint there. So we could be as high as 0.5 parts per million. Nitrite, we're also showing some nitrite, so maybe 0.2 parts per million. And then our nitrates is between 5 and 10. So this means I should do a water change. And for this tank, the bonsai pond, I just set this up recently, so it's in the process of cycling. So getting that reading is actually really good. It shows that I'm not ready to put anything that's like fish or anything in it, which I'm not sure that I'm going to do. This might be a shrimp tank, but regardless, that reading shows that we need to wait a little bit longer. And doing a water change and adding some beneficial bacteria is gonna speed that part along. So I'll do that next. A quick update on the bonsai pond. You can see that I've added some floating plants that are again gonna help with this cycling process. Unfortunately, most of the crypts, especially the crypt parva, has melted away. I've got a couple of leaves left for the crypt Wendidi green. The one that was in the back here is totally gone, but there's still a couple of roots. So I know this is pretty typical of crypts, so I'm kind of gonna have to wait and see. Hopefully they're gonna come back. Maybe you can see in here, there's a tiny bit of new growth. Might be a little hard to see in the shadows there. And a little bit of new growth on the crypt over here. And maybe you can see there's one tiny little leaf there for the crypt parva. So fingers crossed that they're gonna bounce back, but we'll see. But you can see our ficus bonsai here actually seems to be doing pretty well. All of these little green leaves, these are all new growth. So hopefully that means that it is loving its new environment here. So yeah, I'll give more updates on this tank as things progress. But for now, let's do a water change. So our first step is done. We tested all of the parameters in all of the tanks, and everything is good except for our bonsai pond here. So we're gonna move on to our second step, which is water changes. So let's do a quick water change. So I've got this siphon here, got my trusty jug, my cup, and then bucket. So I've got my trusty siphon right here. This part is kind of for gravel vacuuming, but I don't do that a whole lot. And it makes doing water changes in this tank a little bit more difficult. So I'm just gonna take it off, put that aside, and I'm gonna take one end, put it in the bucket, take the other end, put it into the tank, and then I'm just gonna start squeezing this bit, and that'll create the suction. It's gonna take some water out of the tank. All right, I'm gonna call that good. This water level is sort of just above most of the plants. There's a ton of hardscape in here too, so that amount is quite a bit of the water. So yeah. Into this water in here that I just took out is actually hugely beneficial for houseplants like our fern right here. So I've got my watering can and it's actually pretty full, but I'm gonna top it up with whatever water I'm taking out of the tanks, because giving this water to your plants just provides great nutrient benefits for them. So I've got a bucket of fresh water here, just straight out of the tap, and I'm going to condition it to add back into the tank with some of this prime. This is just a freshwater conditioner that's going to remove your chlorine and chloramine, and yeah, I guess in high concentrations you can get rid of ammonia with it. But I'm just gonna add a little bit into the bucket here. Just the recommended amount. This is a 5-gallon bucket, so just that amount. And to do water changes, I don't have like a reverse siphon or anything fancy like that. I use the what I call the JBC method. So we've got our jug, our buckets, and our cup. So I take the jug, take the cup into the bucket, and I'm just gonna fill the jug. And this just kind of makes it a lot more precise than trying to pour this whole bucket into a tiny aquarium. So now you can take your jug, just put your hand in the tank just like this, and then pour the water onto your hands. And this is going to make sure that you don't totally disrupt any of the plants or the hardscape or anything that you've worked so hard to make look good in the tank. If you just pour the water straight in, it's just going to blast everything everywhere. And especially if you have fish in the tank, it's really going to disrupt what they're doing. So as part of this water changes step, I also like to use water to just top up the aquariums. This is especially important if you've got rimless tanks like I do, because they're going to lose a decent amount from evaporation throughout the week. And generally before I do this in tanks with tons of floating plants like this, I like to come in and just take a few handfuls out to just stay on top of that. That is water changing and topping off the tanks done. So you can see I like to leave about 1 inch or so between the surface of the water and the top of the tank. This is going to make sure that none of your fish try to jump into, in my case, other tanks or out of the tanks. So next up, we're going to deal with some algae. You can see I've got a couple types in here. I've got some kind of hair algae / residual moss ball that is on the base and around some of my plants, like the moss here. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to remove that. I'm also going to take a look at the sides of the tanks. If you look down the front here, from the inside of the tank like this, you can get a really good idea of where your green spot algae is on the glass. So I'm actually looking pretty good. You can see there's a decent amount on this side here. And that could be from the additional light from this light. On the other side, not too bad. So I'm gonna look at all of the tanks and just see if we need any algae scraping. So it does look like there's some algae work that I'm gonna have to do. I'm gonna get these little bits off the dwarf sedge here with this toothbrush. Toothbrush, great tool for an aquarium. Then I'm going to come in on the sides here, and I'm going to use this algae scraper. This is basically a razor blade attached to a stick that's perfect for coming along the front of the glass and getting off all of that green spot algae. So to use the toothbrush, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is come in here where you find a little spot of algae and just move your toothbrush around on it. Just take that out. Keep going. You can see I've got a lot. This is actually leftover moss ball that's kind of just around the base of the dwarf sedge. So I'm going to come in here, get that out of the tank. So a lot of this is actually from a moss ball that I had in this tank. And I can say with full confidence, I do not recommend moss balls. Maybe if you have like a shrimp tank, it can be good for them, but if you expect your moss ball to stay in one place, don't necessarily expect that. It is just going to expand and move all over your tank. And it's pretty hard to get rid of once it really gets settled in. I've been dealing with it for quite a while now. So now I've got the trusty algae scraper. You can see it literally is just like a razor blade attached to this bit here. So you want to be kind of careful with this thing. You can cut the silicone on the edge of your tanks pretty easily if you use this incorrectly. But I found that overall, if you just go slow, take your time, just move it straight up and down the glass like this, then you won't really have any problems. This thing is also really great for getting rid of any mineral deposits or anything like that that build up on the edges of your tank, like where the evaporation is happening in a rimless tank. It can be really hard to get those off without this tool. So this tank is actually looking pretty good in terms of algae. If you take your time, do this once a week, maybe once every other week, it's really easy to keep on top of. It's just when it really starts building up is when you're going to get problems, and your maintenance is going to take a lot longer. Overall, pretty easy 5-minute step. Let's move on to step number 4, and that's going to be trimming the plants. So when it comes to trimming plants in my aquariums, I kind of just like to sit down for a minute and just look at each aquarium and kind of decide if I think anything needs a trim. So what I'm looking for here is maybe leaves that have algae on them, plants that are growing really tall that might need to be replanted, anything that looks like it's maybe a little bit unruly. So taking a look at the Blackwater riverbed, this tank is still pretty new and I don't really have to do any trimming. Nothing is getting too crazy overgrown, and I'm pretty happy with the overall growth at the moment. So I'm gonna leave that one alone. And the same is true pretty much for the bonsai pond. This one is much newer. We've kind of already looked at the plants in here, but I'm just gonna leave everything alone. The growth in Quarry Mountain is pretty significant, and I honestly really like it. I think it looks awesome, but this dwarf sage here in the center has some leaves that are just a little bit too much. So I think I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna take out just some of the longer ones, just trim it back a little bit. Trimming like this isn't bad for the plants, and it can even stimulate growth at times. So I'm gonna get in here with my trusty pair of aquarium scissors, and I'm just going to carefully come down to the base of the plants and just cut off a couple leaves. And I'm just going to let them float up to the surface, and I'll collect them later. Doing this is overall good for all of these plants. They're putting a lot of energy into these leaves, and taking away these places for them to put in a whole lot of energy can do things like cause them to start putting energy into more root growth. That kind of thing. That's going to be overall good for the health of the plant. So at this stage of plant trimming, I also like to go through and just add some fertilizer to all of the tanks. I try to do this every couple of days, but at minimum, I do it on my maintenance day. So I use a little bit of a different amount for each tank, but I'm just going to go in, add 1/4 of a cap to a 1/2 a cap to each tank. And when you add fertilizer to a tank, it's best to try to put it kind of into the flow of where your filter outlet is, pushing water into your tank. So for number 5 in our maintenance, that is going to be checking the filters. So I've got this hang on the back filter here. I've got this tiny little water pump here for the bonsai ponds. And then for Quarry Mountain, we've got a canister filter. So first, for this hang on the back, I'm just going to open it up a little bit and just kind of take a look inside. This filter hasn't been running for that long. It's been maybe a month, and the flow seems totally fine. So I think I'm just going to let this one go. For the little pond pump here, I think I'm not going to do anything for this. I'm just going to keep an eye kind of on the top here and make sure that nothing is getting into it, and just keep an eye on the amount of flow coming out of it. If I notice that the flow gets pretty low, then I'll take it out and see what I can do about it. But this thing was like a $10 little pump, so I'm not too concerned if I end up having to buy another one. The main maintenance that we're going to have to do today for our filters is with our canister here. So this is an Oase Biomaster 250, and it's a thermo, so it has the heater in the back there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open this thing up and just take out the kind of pre-filter here and squeeze out those sponges. So you wanna be a little bit careful when you're dealing with canister filters. You see I've got a bucket here ready to catch any water. I've also got a little bit of water in there that we'll use later. I've taken it out from where it sits. I've also left this thing unplugged for maybe 10 to 15 minutes to let the heater cool down and just let everything settle before I open up part of it. The main thing that I'm going to do here today for maintenance is just I'm going to take out the pre-filter and just squeeze out the sponges into this bucket here to just make sure that that filter gets its sort of initial cleaning. So I'm just unlocking both sides of the filter here so that I can get into the pre-filter here. And I am just going to take this part, come over to my bucket of water here, and just take this bit apart. There we go. So one important thing, guys, to be sure of when you're cleaning out filter sponges like this is to make sure to do it in a bucket of dechlorinated water. So I'm just going to take the sponges off here, just toss them into the bucket, remove the tube. I'll just give that a little rinse. And then I'm just going to take the sponges and just squeeze them out into this bucket of water. And this is just going to get all of the built up gunk off of them. So now I'm just putting this thing back together. I'm going to put this back into the filter here. So then I'm just going to lock that into place. And then put our filter back where it lives. So I plugged back in the heater, and before we plug in the filter again, it's a good idea to just pump some water through the whole thing, just pressing down like this. Just make sure that there's water moving through the whole thing. Once we plug the whole thing back in, give it a couple more pumps, and I'll just use this lock here to adjust the flow to what it was. You can see there's quite a bit of gunk floating around in the aquarium now. That just came out of the outlet there after doing that bit of cleaning, and that is perfectly natural. That's going to happen. It's just going to get blown around and then sucked up by the inlet. So it's now back in place, and that part of the maintenance is done. This is the bucket of water that I squeezed the sponges into. And as you can see, it is totally dirty. But if you want, you can take this water and pour it into your watering can. Use that to feed your plants, because this stuff is really full of fish waste, and it's going to be extra, extra good for those plants. All right, guys, so that is our maintenance for the day done. Just to recap, we did some water testing, we did a water change, we did a little bit of algae scraping, algae maintenance, we did some trimming and replanting inside the tank, and we did a little bit of filter maintenance. So these are 5 things that you can do on a weekly or monthly basis to maintain your tanks. And honestly, it can be pretty fun and therapeutic to spend an afternoon just working on your tanks. Also gives you a good opportunity to take a moment and just reflect on your fish and really enjoy the hobby. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.